Part of Double P Media, doublepmedia.com.
Spoiler alert, this podcast is going to be covering Season 2 of The Crown, episodes 6 through 10, 6 through the finale. So if you haven't seen those yet, get to watching so that you can join us and have some fun. You've been warned.
You're listening to Podcast Lilibet.
My mommy won't let me stay in my threesome. Jackie gave up for it, it's princess season. And I, Tawny Armstrong-Jones, will marry you. What else should low lifes like me ever do? Sucks, but he's got his ducks in a row, don't you see? That I don't want to, but I will marry you, so I can please my mommy.
Welcome to Podcast Lilibet, a Double P production. Once again, on the Double P feed and on the Lilibet feed. Thank you for joining us. This time around, we're talking Season 2, Episodes 6 through 10 of The Crown on Netflix. You can call me Quadruple M.
Okay.
Quadruple M.
That stands for Mediocre Moderator Matt Murdock.
Oh.
And we've got a few friends with us this time around to talk about it. My usual co-host, plus a special guest sitting in with us this time as well. I'm going to introduce her first, because she knows that talking to me on a podcast is just like what Philip knows, that may cause a lot of turbulence, but it's really just air. It's Stephanie. How are you, Stephanie?
I'm doing great, Matt. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much for joining us. How did you get involved with The Crown?
I think I pretty much invited myself on and said, I love the show. I'm a queen. Here I am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Your Majesty. Our next guest comes to us regularly. She has to put up with me on the Dust podcast, which you can also find on the Double P Media YouTube, if you check through all of that. She does have a secret past, just like her beloved David, that she doesn't want disclosed publicly. But we're going to do it anyway. We're going to be those double A's.
Double A's.
Argumentative archivists. Her big secret is that she is the one who convinced me to come back to Game of Thrones after I decided to quit the show. So it's her fault that you're having to listen to me podcast all of the time. You've all suffered many a podcast because of what she did. Holly, welcome back.
You're welcome, listeners. I have a lot of walking back to do this episode, so look forward to that. God.
And finally, you might call our final host an American screaming zealot, if you wish, like Billy Graham. But he's going to have to pray to God for some forgiveness for himself, because he'll never forgive me for dragging him on so many podcasts in the past. It's Bubba.
Hey. Real excited to talk the second half of Season 2 of The Crown. This show just gets better and better for us viewers as it gets worse and worse for the characters. I love it.
And we're going to be talking about those characters in these episodes, but we want to know what you think. That's what's really important. We can sit here and talk 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 and talk. But we'd much rather read and read and read what you think. So to do that, simply send tweets to @double, the letter P for podcast and HQ for headquarters. Or you can find them at the same handle on Instagram. You can check in with the Facebook page there as well, facebook.com/double, the letters PHQ. Or you can hit Podcast Lilibet by tweeting to @LilibetPod, @LILIBET pod. You can also find all of these podcasts on the Double P Media YouTube. Just search for Double P Media on YouTube. Or if you want to go to a quick little shortcut, you can go youtube.com/user/fit and trim. That's FITTENTRIM. That's enough about the podcast. Let's get into talking about these episodes. The first thing we like to do is we like to rate these episodes on a scale of 1 to 10. And we, of course, being the Double P Media Network, we do, of course, do doubles. So, Holly, I'm going to begin with you. What would you rate these 5 episodes of The Crown?
My scale is all about me, not necessarily the show, but I'm going to give these 5 episodes 8.5 double M's out of 10.
Double M's?
Misremembering mishaps. So I totally forgot this episode with David and his involvement with the Nazis, and I'm so embarrassed for all of the defending of him I've been doing up until now. So I sort of became that D&D. If you guys watched Game of Thrones, in the special features, David and Dan were said, Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. That's me today. I kind of forgot that David was a Nazi supporter, and I'm embarrassed. So I'm going to resign from the podcast. Just kidding. Seriously, though, episodes 8 and 9 were really fantastic episodes, and it was a good batch overall.
All right. Well, 8.5 is a pretty good rating.
Yeah.
How about you, Stephanie? How would you have rated these 5 episodes on a scale of 1 to 10?
I think I'm going to do 10 out of 10, actually.
10 out of 10?
Yeah, these were some of my favorite episodes of The Crown. I think they were really well done. They were just great episodes of TV in general. Very memorable.
Excellent. You got a double for us?
Sure, double P.
Double P?
The Landering Philip.
Ah, double P. All right. Bubba, how about you?
Well, I love these episodes, and it's weird that once again, I feel like my rating is going to be the lowest of anybody. But these characters are really going through some double T's, turbulent times. But for my ranking, I'm actually going to go 8, what I like to call triple H's out of 10.
Triple H's?
Triple H's, as we all know, stands for half-hearted Hiles. So David's Nazi negotiations were pretty half-hearted, but still shocking. As an American, maybe I should have known these things. I actually had read about them as I was watching these episodes, and that got revealed to me a bit before I saw this episode. But still, these characters, this family, is getting torn apart, it feels like, at all sides. And once again, it's terrible for the characters, great drama for us. I want to point out that these episodes had more familiar faces, like I talked about in the last podcast. We had Billy Graham. That actor was on Boardwalk Empire. JFK is Dexter. Prince Philip's sister, Cecile, is played by an actress who plays Greta on Babylon Berlin, a show we podcast about with our Babylon Berlin Babble podcast. Hey, guess what? Young Prince Philip in the flashback is played by Uhtred, son of Uhtred's son, young Uhtred, on season 4 of The Last Kingdom. I mean, we podcast about that as well. Familiar faces, families being ripped apart. What else do you want in your quality Netflix drama? 8 out of 10, loved it.
Great that you brought up those callbacks to our other podcasts. As for me, I'm going to give this set of episodes a 9.5 out of 10, what I like to call double S's. Charlotte Showman.
Like, what?
No.
No? Oh. I feel like the last 3 episodes of this particular season are very strong. And in fact, probably 3 of the strongest episodes that we've seen in this series so far. Just having the whole Kennedy episode, and especially what was going on with Jackie, and then following up with the whole Philip and Charles thing in the 9th episode, that just really, to me, elevated this series drama-wise and emotion-wise for me, which is always most important, up above many series that I've watched over the years. Why don't we move on to our traditional first opening game as well, because that's one of those things that we like to do in order to kind of grease up the wheels before we start talking about the next episodes. We'll start off by reviewing some results from polls that we took regarding what's worse in a set of episodes that we did last time we were on. And the first poll in regards to season 2, episode 1 through 5 asks, what's worse? Feeling like your speech is inferior to your wife's, or feeling like your beard is inferior to your friend's? And we got 800 votes on the 100 Twitter, so it's almost like 6 out of 8 people voted to say inferior beards was worse That's 75% of the winners. In regards to the next poll, what's worse, royals or commoners? That's the one where Tommy Lascelles had to come in and edit out my response because Bubba and Holly had deemed it inappropriate. And it's no surprise that 1,000 votes on the 100 Twitter came in. It's almost like all 10 of you voted for royals in favor of Holly because you didn't get to hear my argument. So 100% for royals versus commoners. Royals are worse. And the final poll from the last time, again, regarding the episodes 1 through 5 of season 2, what's worse, staying in a miserable marriage, that's a double M, or the dilemmas of divorce? And this is if you're Eileen Parker. And this was an interesting one. 900 votes came in on the 100 Twitter. It's almost like 9 of you voted. And it's almost like 7 out of 9 of you voted for divorce dilemmas were worse than a miserable marriage, which was very interesting.
Man.
Now, that's what I argued. So once again, thank you for making me the voice of the public.
Yes.
I think I'm worried about the state of some of our listeners' marriages, though.
I think I am too.
Wait a minute.
It's time to move on to this week's What's Worse questions. That's regarding these episodes 6 through 10 of season 2, questions that we're going to ask. And I suppose what we'll do, since we have a fourth, is we'll just kind of shuffle ourselves down an assembly line. We'll start with Stephanie asking a question. Stephanie, can you think of 2 situations in this particular set of episodes as to what would be worse?
I'll choose being married to Philip or being married to JFK.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I get to go first. So I'm going to say being married to JFK. And here's why. He's not going to be around. Think about how long Philip lasted. Philip lasted for a very long time. He just recently left us. He's going to be there for a very long time. And so therefore, being married to JFK is worse because you don't get to be with him. Because they're both such lovely people. You don't get to be with JFK as long.
Matt, I think you made your argument for me.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
I think so too.
He's going to be gone. There's a great saying that many married people say that I know, free at last. And so, nothing against our president, our bit of Camelot, but I honestly think, Matt, you are going the wrong way. JFK, God bless him, he seems to have had some trouble with fidelity. And if you had to put up with that as a wife, there's another saying I say, and that is anytime I say goodbye to somebody, whether it's, a family member after a holiday, or it's, my work colleagues, what do I say? Good riddance. And so I say being married to Prince Philip is worse because he's going to be around 90 years.
Yeah, good point. Holly, you get to decide who's right, who's wrong.
I mean, Bubba's right. But like you said, you made the point for him when you said JFK is not going to be around. So, yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well, folks, prove Holly wrong and vote on the poll at Lilibet Pod, at LILIBet Pod on Twitter. It'll be coming out shortly after this podcast is released, and maybe you'll even find it retweeted on the Double P Media, which is at the word double, the letters PHQ. So everybody shifts a spot. This time around, it's going to be Holly asking the questions. Holly, what do you got for us?
Kind of along the same lines as the last one, but what's worse, marrying someone just to please your mother, like Tony Armstrong-Jones, or marrying somebody who could be your daughter, like Peter? Ugh.
Oh my goodness. I think, there's a lot of successful marriages that happen between older men and younger women. But, mother-in-laws can be a nightmare. So I'm going to say marrying someone to please your mother.
Ooh.
Stephanie, that's a really, really good argument. But you're completely wrong, and here's why. Marrying someone who could be your daughter, like Peter is, he's just going to trade you in for a new model right away, right? I mean, you hit 30 and you're gone. So what's the point of that? I mean, when he goes, not only that, but just think of the psychological implications of, a constant need for 19-year-olds. Is that a double N? I'm not sure. But I feel like very much so that marrying somebody who could be your daughter, being like Peter, would be worse.
Okay, I get to judge. And let me say that history is going to guide me on this. Group Captain Peter Townsend stayed married to what, by today's standards, we would say would be a way too young bride with too big an age discrepancy. But they stayed married for a long time. So I think that's I think, Matt, like you've heard this before, you're wrong.
Well, we'll see. We'll put it on the poll once again. I don't mind being wrong, just as long as everybody gets a chance to vote. And so, go to @LilibetPod, @LILIBetPod on Twitter to find that poll, or search for them also on the double P. That's at the word double, the letters PHQ on Twitter. Everybody shifts the spot. Now Bubba gets to ask a question, and Holly gets to go first, Stephanie has to go second, and I get to judge.
All right, ladies, here we go. This is a tough question, I feel. So what is worse? Getting jabs from Jackie Kennedy behind your back, like Queen Elizabeth did in these episodes, or going out to a comedy club like Macmillan did and being the butt of cruel comedy? What's worse? Being made fun of to your face, like happened to Macmillan, or getting poked in the back, like Jackie Kennedy did to Queen Elizabeth? What's worse? Holly, what do you think?
The way you framed it just now, I'm going to say I think actually being the butt of cruel comedy in your face is worse. Simply because I'm a woman and I've had to deal with other toxic ladies in my lifetime, and I'm used to jabs behind the back because that's sometimes how ladies can be. So I'm already used to the former. So I think being the butt of a joke in front of hundreds of people laughing at you would be worse.
Well, this works out perfectly because Holly proved my point, and she said exactly what I was going to say, is that women always talk about you behind your back, which makes it so much worse.
Boy, it's a tough one. I feel like I should probably vote for Holly because I feel like public humiliation is worse. What happens behind your back only happens between certain people. It is a little secretive, but I feel like I'm going to go with Holly on this one, but it's up to you folks to decide. Once again, the polls at LilibetPod, at LILIBetPod on Twitter. Final time around, I get to ask perhaps the most important question of the entire 5 episodes. What's worse, running in the annual challenge at Gordonston or really bad air turbulence? Bubba, what do you think?
Oh, man, if you have ever ridden in a plane next to me, I hate turbulence. I am a white knuckle flyer. My fingernails are in those armrests, and I am terrified for the entire flight. Side story, I was flying back from Europe one time with my buddy Catfish, and he goes, I got this drug that'll help you with that. He pulls out this black Ziploc bag filled with like 90 different little pills that all looked completely different. And he goes through the Ziploc bag, and he goes, here, I think this is it. Of course, I'm a scared flyer. I'm like, you think that's it? And he goes, yeah. So I take this pill, and honest to God, right after takeoff, I fell asleep. And this was a flight from Europe to Los Angeles. I woke up again as we were landing in LA. I was like, what did you give me? He said, I don't know, but you were speaking in tongues for most of the flight.
Wow.
So turbulence is the worst. That's my vote.
Okay, you're wrong because turbulence is fun. That just like breaks up the monotonous, boring flight for me. It's like, all right, it's got a little roller coaster time here, so I don't feel the same way as Bubba, and I definitely would die running in that annual challenge at Gordonston. I would die. I would have a heart attack and die before I got to the end. Philip would have to wait 2 hours for me to return. I would need the royal detective to definitely save my ass, so that is definitely worse.
Who wins, Stephanie?
Holly. For the exact same reason, I would die running anywhere, and you can survive bad air turbulence.
Bubba, you would have had my vote. I too am a bare white knuckles flyer. I don't mind it once I'm in the air. It's just the taking off and the landing. And that's actually where most turbulence happens, is when you're taking off and when you're landing, or when you're approaching or when you're departing. So
you mean the funnest part of the flight? What's wrong with you guys?
Yes, absolutely. Because that fits perfectly with my character. Speaking of characters, let's get into talking about some of these new characters that we have coming in these episodes. Some of them are one-offs, and we'll start off. Bubba mentioned one earlier, the guy playing young Philip, and his name is Finn Elliott. Again, we do know him as the son of Uhtred. So, Bubba, does that make him the Uhtred, son of Uhtred, son of Uhtred?
Yes, and if you have never watched The Last Kingdom, that sentence doesn't make much more sense if you have watched Last Kingdom.
Except it starts every recap. I am Uhtred,
That's true.
son of Uhtred, which we have a lot of fun with. Don't skip the recaps when you watch The Last Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen. Spoiler alert. They're wonderful. We also have Julian Baring, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, as a slightly aged up Charles. Lila Barrett-Rye makes a couple of appearances. I don't think much in the way of speaking lines as a young Princess Anne. We've got some other one-offs which are great, and Bubba mentioned a couple of those as well. We have Billy Graham in Season 2, Episode 6. He's, of course, was one of the original TV evangelists, as well as his crusades in England, which he's made famous for in this episode. Played by Paul Sparks. You might know him as Mickey Doyle from Boardwalk Empire. We have Jackie Kennedy, who, of course, was wife to JFK, and she's in the 8th episode of this season. Jackie's famous, for kind of reinventing the role of the First Lady, much the same way that Eleanor Roosevelt did, played by Jodie Balfour. And I have to admit, I don't know much about this actress. I do remember seeing her in a very small role in Supernatural, like over 10 years ago. It was an earlier season, I think season 6 or something like that. That's the only other television show I've seen her in.
She's in that Apple TV show For All Mankind, and she's very good in that.
Oh, cool. Excellent. John F. Kennedy, of course, played by Dexter. Michael C. Hall shows up. So we've got a bunch of Dexter alums, some Game of Thrones alums. But yeah, Michael C. Hall plays the 35th President of the United States. Princess Cecile, who Bubba mentioned earlier, that's Philip's sister that was killed in the plane crash in Episode 9. Leonie Benesch, is that how you say her name, Bubba?
I believe so, but she's a great actress, a German actress, I would believe, from Babylon Berlin, and yeah, she's really good in this episode.
Barely recognized her, actually. That was interesting. Kurt Hahn from the same episode, Philip's schoolmaster in Scotland. Is that a double S? I'm not sure, but played by Berghart Klossner. And finally, Stephen Ward, who was the dreaded osteopath, actually first spoken of about between Elizabeth and Margaret in the very beginning of this season, played by Richard Lintern. He's got lots of IMDb credits, but I haven't seen any of them. So any thoughts about any of these characters or actors or what have you?
I was just going to say, I think Jodie Balfour did a really great job. I love that accent. I don't know where it's from. Grey Gardens, that I don't know. I love the way they talk. It's amazing. So she did it really well.
You guys ready to get into talking about these episodes?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we're going to start off with Season 2, Episode 6, Holly's favorite episode for sure. It is entitled Vergangenheit.
God bless you.
Which means past in German. It was written by Peter Morgan and directed by Philippa Lothorpe. It's definitely a story about the Double D.
Double D.
David dilemma. In 1945, documents are discovered linking David to the Nazis. There's a triple D in there somewhere. And Winston Churchill and King George agree to suppress the information revealed. The Queen Mother gives a back in my day speech as she and Elizabeth watch Billy Graham coming to save England. As Mozart's String Quartet No. 5 in D major and Humphrey Littleton's Bad Penny Blues both play sequentially, Wallace notices the double D.
Double D.
Yeah, that's David doldrums taking effect. They're both bitter, that's a double B, and David needs a job. The Queen asks Michael Adine to arrange a meeting with Billy Graham, and she and Philip have a double D, a David disagreement about whether to let her uncle into the country or not. At Wadden Hall, the archival work continues, and the double D's, David documents, are rediscovered.
Someone just get this guy out of here.
Come on, guys. The historian trio debate on publishing, ending with the decision that the Americans will do the double D. dirty deed? David writes more flattering letters to Wallace as he travels to Sussex. Billy Graham arrives and preaches. Neither Philip nor the Queen Mother are that impressed, but the Queen has a good conversation with Billy Graham about Christianity and public speaking. The head archivist with all of the David information comes to see Prime Minister Macmillan and gives him news about the double Ds. David documents. As for David himself, he has a great job war counsel and then writes another flattering letter to Wallace. We get the Triple M Macmillan-Marburg meeting with the Queen, and everything comes out about David. Queen Mother Elizabeth comes to explain the cover-up to her queen with several corrections and an elaboration by Michael Adine. As Elizabeth reads the file, David gets offered jobs and is approved by the government, I guess, but must visit Elizabeth for permission. She confronts him regarding the Marburg files, and he defends himself. She asks Philip for advice. He tells her to give Kensington 3472, Tommy Lascelles, a visit. Tommy likes toy soldiers, evidently, but he will make time for the Queen. He's not keen on her calling his battle that he's got set up Waterloo, nor putting his soldiers wherever she wants, nor forgiving David. He tells the story of David's transgressions. Tommy's accounts and a timely Billy Graham sermon help Elizabeth reach a decision and call David back for an audience to give her answer. That answer is, get out. David uses the opportunity to make one last great criticism of the entire monarchy until he gets a swift shame on you and is booted out of the country. He can't even find it in himself to write a letter to Wallace, as the Marburg file is given the go-ahead for publishing. And we actually get that same train crossing shot for the 17th time in the series. I think they only shot it once and just keep using it. Elizabeth calls Billy back for an audience to talk about forgiveness. He gives her the solution about her own unwillingness to forgive by telling her to ask for forgiveness for herself. She goes to the church and prays. David gets home and cries on Wallace's shoulder. And then Philip comes home drunk from partying with, Tommy Lascelles and the Queen Mother? And tells Elizabeth that Jesus gives her a gold star for kicking David out. In the end, David takes a good hard look in the mirror as we see a montage of images of the real David from history being shown with the Nazis. Stephanie, what did you think about this particular episode regarding David and his involvement with the Nazis?
It was surprising. I didn't know the real history until I watched The Crown, and then I think, like everybody, while they're watching The Crown, they stop and they Google to see if what happened in the episode like really happened in real life and how it happened in real life. But yes, it was very surprising to me. I do like British history and I do like royal history. So I was, again, like I said, I was a little surprised that this actually happened, and it was like, whoa. So, but I thought they did a great job portraying it, and I enjoyed it.
To me, the context of why that information was suppressed initially was very interesting. Again, we'd mentioned this in an earlier podcast, but the whole idea of why this information would have been suppressed at all was simply because there was already bad blood going into World War I about the English's, the monarchy's involvement, cousins in Germany and Russia. One of the cousins was a Russian czar. And that kind of thing. And so the need to separate themselves from now this even worse Nazi regime made it very interesting. And that opening scene with George, saying it could do terrible damage to our family. If you didn't know that history, I wonder how many people were wondering, well, what is it in these files that's about George and Queen Mother Elizabeth, until it slowly you get put together that it's a David episode and you realize that it's going to be about him.
I mean, they literally changed their name to Windsor for this reason, right?
Yep.
So yeah. Oh man. I really wanted to stay on his side too. He's He brought up some good points, and when he was trying to defend himself to Elizabeth, that he was trying to stay diplomatic and they used to be friends, and I was like kind of buying it until Tommy, got involved, and one wonders if we should even believe everything Tommy has to say. But in this case, I was like, oh no, of course, he lost me when he said, when Tommy tells them that he was still encouraging the air raids so Britain would be more ready to surrender. And I was like, oh yeah, that is inexcusable and unforgivable.
Well, sometimes Triple T, truth-telling Tommy, is a bit of a bother, but I tend to like his frankness and his ability to be able to be front with it. You weren't the only one. The Queen actually seemed like she was buying into it. She was ready to forgive David until Philip talked her into going and talking to Tommy. I especially love the whole idea of Elizabeth playing with Tommy's soldiers, and he didn't. he didn't like that very much.
He hated it.
It's very typical of his character, does it not?
Yeah, I really like this theme of forgiveness in this episode too, and how Elizabeth is asking different people and getting their opinions, and then how she's gonna kind of carry forward with other family issues and her ability to forgive in those situations. So I just thought it was really interesting. And I will also say I thought the birthday party for Trooper the Pug was pretty cute.
Yeah, that's excellent. Something that, before I get to you, Bubba, something I just want to bring up. We talk a lot about the characters and the story and how it relates to actual history and what have you or not. But something we haven't really paid attention to, or maybe we even take it for granted, is just some of the technical expertise of this show. So I'm going to try and put something out there for every episode in regards to that. And for me, this time around, it was the sound design of that very first scene where you're just seeing the road, and then you hear way off in the distance this rumble, and it's still like another 10 seconds before you see the car come over the hill. That was excellent sound design. I don't know how much of that was real in microphone and how much of that was simply placed in there. But it was amazing, because that's what you actually would hear I don't watch a whole lot of war movies, so I don't know. But it's one of the first times I've ever seen a television series do such great sound design in that case. Bubba, what did you think of this story?
Well, I don't want to step on a landmine and get into controversy. But as I said when we first started talking about David, back when we were talking about season 1 of The Crown, I found him fascinating because he was so weak. And obviously, through the lens of history, what David did is absolutely 100% despicable. But because I find the character fascinating because he's so weak, this just feels like another example of his weak character and his inability, I wish I could come up with a better term, but his inability to quote unquote man up and kind of do what's right. It's once again taking the easy way out. And I thought it was fascinating. I think it obviously paints David in history for someone who, once again, in real life, this is despicable. There's no excuse. It's unforgivable. On a TV show, I found it a fascinating insight into a weak character's, just moral decay. I loved the episode, even as I knew it was horrific to the family members to hear that one of their own did this. Just great, great drama. That's what this show is about. I loved it.
Anything else about this particular episode?
Yeah, towards the end, when Philip comes back and talks to Elizabeth, and he is drunk. He had gotten drunk with the Queen Mother and Tommy, and they were all bonding over David's expulsion from the country. And I really feel like I missed that scene. Where is that scene? Give us those 3 characters drinking and complaining together. That sounds fun. I'm kind of sad we missed out on that.
It almost feels like you get kind of what Philip's drunk ramblings would be like in the next episode when he's complaining about how everybody's throwing a party for Tony and he never got the good treatment, kind of a back in my day speech of his own there. I agree. I would love to see that scene. That would have been hilarious. Especially Tommy Lascelles in his cups. That would be excellent. Yes. Anything else, guys?
Well, how about this? Did you, once again, I always point out that we studied American history when I was in school more than anything, and so I'm very familiar with American history. And just the idea that even back at this time in history, that the Crown could help cover this up and that America was going to reveal it, that's just very, in my opinion, that's just very scary to think, hey, the royal family can actually hide this obviously, important information for the country to know about the, very recent history with they were being bombed, for God's sakes. And so it's just, this will sound silly. It made me glad to be an American and during some of these times to be like, holy smokes.
Well, I mean, with as many conspiracy theories as we have in America about American history, you have to imagine that our government has covered some stuff up too, right?
Way to bring us all down, Matt. No,
Yeah.
no, of course, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that we've got just terrific history too. Especially we were so late to join World War II, kind of one of our country's shames. But yeah, this was just something new. The I guess the positive thing you would say about America's shame is that we can't keep a secret. It all comes out. all our terrible stuff comes out.
Well, let's move on to Season 2, Episode 7, Matrimonium, written again by showrunner Peter Morgan, directed by Benjamin Caron. Margaret's Matrimonium, that's a double M. In Brussels, in August of 1959, as Ronnie Hilton's version of The Wonder of You. That's not Elvis's version, that would cost Left Bank Pictures too much money. But as that plays, Group Captain Peter Townsend writes a breakup letter to Margaret. She is devastated as he tells her he's getting married. She tells Tony and practically proposes, that's a double P, to him, and he ain't having any of it. She leaves in a huff, and then we find out that Tony has mummy issues, and those mummy issues want Tony to get married to the princess. As Gorky's Symphony No. 3, Symphony of Sorrowful Songs plays, Tony breaks up with his dancer Jackie, then sort of breaks up with his Fry threesome. Next, as the Queen Mother watches nature programs, Margaret gets a motorcycle ride from Tony, accompanied by Max Richter's redo of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. With chafed knees and Russian nesting doll style presentation, Tony proposes to Margaret. She goes to Elizabeth, gets permission, and sets to work on announcing before Peter Townsend can announce his marriage. Meanwhile, Tony wants to tell his mummy that he did a thing, but she won't come to the phone. Elizabeth tells Adine to help with Margaret's announcement, but Elizabeth's pregnancy announcement must come first, according to Adine. Margaret is not happy to hear this news at all. Tony watches election results with the Frys and is ecstatic that he'll outrank his stepfather, stepbrother, and half-brother finally. After Philip and Elizabeth talk about her pregnancy, Elizabeth hosts a party for Tony and Margaret as promised. Tony's friends, let's just say they confuse Elizabeth. And as it turns out, Elizabeth isn't the only pregnant person in the room. Fry has to tell Tony, which is not great, all the while Philip is in his drinks and giving a back in my day speech himself. While Elizabeth tells Adine to check in to Tony, the Queen Mother, also in her drinks, starts a conga line. Now, when you need to investigate the natural and unnatural relationships of your future brother-in-law, naturally, you call in Tommy Lascelles, private investigator, Kensington 3472. The briefing leads Elizabeth to believe what Tony and Camilla Fry already know. What a more timely spot than for the Queen to go into labor. As Mozart's Latte Dominium plays, Prince Andrew is born. When Margaret comes to see Prince Andrew, Elizabeth voices her concerns about Tony. Margaret will have none of it. Then we skip ahead to May 6, 1960, and see everyone preparing for Tony and Margaret's wedding day as Zbigniew Preisner's version of Dies Irae plays. Philip will give Margaret away proudly, while Tony and his mother have words about her own pride. We hear the actual vows that were televised from the real Margaret and Tony as the episode ends.
Matt, I want to hear your opinion first, because I mentioned in our review of the first 5 episodes of season 2, this actor, Matthew Goode, who I think is a very good actor, but who always, in my opinion, comes across as cold. And so I didn't want this marriage to happen. Forget history, forget whatever happened. I was like, oh my God, Margaret, I've grown to care about you so much over this, season and a half of TV, and you falling for this character that I was repulsed by in a lot of ways. I didn't want her to do it. But Matt, in our previous podcast, you said that you liked him and you thought he was good and you were fascinated by him. So what did you think in this episode when this marriage of convenience, theoretically, for the bride and groom come together and happen? What was your opinion?
I think that Tommy Lassel's actually summed up who Tony is better than I ever could, and that is that he's an artist and he's going to do artistic things, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I definitely liked him better in the Beryl episode before, but I feel like I actually understand him more coming out of this episode. And there are things about his past that I feel is you could apply some sympathy to, maybe even point to the fact that he's turned out the way that he has to be such a rebellious kind of person because of the way that he was kind of the runt of the family. He's definitely got a chip on his shoulder all of the time. He's not a good person. I mean, I'm going to say that too. I feel terrible that Margaret made that decision, at least as far as these characters go. And I definitely like him a lot less after this particular episode, especially with the Fry threesome and all of that going on. And the fact I don't even know if he offered any support to them in regards to his the pregnancy or whatever. So that sounds really awful. But I don't quite villainize him in the same way that you guys do, because, as Tommy Lassel's pointed out, maybe this should be the Tommy of Lassel's podcast. But the whole idea that he pointed out that while he was unmarried, he was free to do whatever he chose. And that excuses the behavior to this point. From this point forward, we're going to have to see what happens with Tony Armstrong-Jones and see how we feel about him from there. And I definitely agree with you and Holly now that he's not that great of a person. Holly, are you ready to give me a I told you so?
I mean, you just did it for me. I don't really need to. I'm actually a little upset with Margaret because she proposes just out of spite more than anything. When she finds out about Peter's engagement, which, by the way, I think I spoke about the age difference between Peter and Margaret in the last episode, and I was okay with it. But then finding out that he is now engaged to a 19-year-old and Margaret's getting up into her late 20s, okay, I'm like, all right, that's too far for me. So, yeah, gross. Peter, you're gross now. I liked you, but now not anymore.
I will only say that they stayed married for the rest of their lives.
So it was the rest of their lives.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Okay, you said for a long time, and I wanted to ask did another 19-year-old come along. So, well, that's nice, I guess, but still, no, I don't have to like it. It's okay.
Good.
I feel like the promise they made to each other when they became engaged is very foreshadowing of how it's just not going to work. Tony doesn't want her to bore him, and she doesn't want him to hurt her. And I'm like, yeah, let's see how well this is going to turn out. I feel like they just spelled out exactly what's going to ruin their relationship for us before we even get there.
So again, I like this episode. I think it's a good episode, but I actually, in contrast to Bubba, I find Matthew Goode, I think charming, or maybe he's just like really good looking that I like him. But Tony Armstrong-Jones is gross. He is not a great person, but I like Matthew Goode's portrayal of him. But again, I think that might be because Matthew Goode is so attractive, and I think he's a good actor too, but I enjoyed it.
Have you looked at pictures of the real Tony Armstrong-Jones? Did he have that same kind of appeal?
I think Matthew Good is more handsome. Yeah, I mean, he's a handsome guy, I think, for being British. So.
Wait a minute.
Whoa. God.
Oh.
As someone of British descent, I resemble that remark. Ouch.
Anything else about this episode, guys? What I do want to give my technical shout out here. The shot of Tony and Margaret being followed by, Margaret's car. And you see the shot from the inside of another car that's parked. And then it turns to the mirror and you see them still going down the street. Those are kinds of shots that are just, they add so much to an episode that you just don't really think about. You take for granted. But man, that just to get the clarity of the mirror and everything like that, and planning the position of the camera, that stuff's got to be technically difficult. What else we got on this?
I guess this episode following the David episode, there really is a parallel you can draw between Margaret and David and how neither of them want to give up their titles and how they've kind of suffered, even though they've had different paths, but they just want to hold on so badly to their royal status, and it's wound up getting both of them into trouble along the way. So I just find that a little interesting.
That is an excellent point.
I really like the character the guy who plays Philip, and I can't think of his name right now.
His name is Matt Smith.
Or Doctor Who, if you prefer.
Yes.
I would say, Matt, that the one thing about the end of this season and this specific episode is that, in my opinion, compared to this Toby, who Princess Margaret is marrying, it suddenly makes Prince Philip look a whole lot better.
Excellent point. One of the things that you'll find if you read anything about Philip and Elizabeth is that one of the things that Philip actually really enjoyed about Philip, at least according to internal stuff and things that have been said, is that he never really treated her like the queen. He just treated her like just a normal person, which is, I think you see exemplified in these episodes, not these particular episodes, but in this show, how much Elizabeth really desired that, how much that was robbed of her because David abdicated, and how she just really wanted to be a double M, a multi-mom, and it didn't work out for her. Well, let's move on to another marriage. Let's move on to season 2, episode 8, Dear Mrs. Kennedy, again written by showrunner Peter Morgan, this time directed by Stephen Daldry. It's a story of a quintuple T.
Quintuple T?
Yeah, triumphant and tragic tale of two titans.
Yeah.
In Ghana, there's a play made for independence from the British monarchy. We then get to Elizabeth feeling older and seeing a younger looking, even though she's the same age Jackie Kennedy, wow all of the folks in Paris on the telly. Brezhnev visits Ghana and their president, Kwame Nkrumah. Did I say that name right? I have no idea. As Prime Minister Macmillan briefs the Queen about it. Macmillan has a lot of nice things to say about Mrs. Kennedy too, which dismays Elizabeth slightly. Our plant-killing designer, the herbicidist, is back with the perfect gown for the dinner with the Kennedys. He says, if you've got a monarchy, flaunt a monarchy, as Joe Loss and his orchestra play Wheels Cha-Cha. Philip insists that he must sit next to Jackie at dinner, just as everyone must sit next to Jackie at dinner. Adine and Charteris offer commentaries on the protocol as the Kennedys arrive, and their arrival seems to excite everyone except Porchy, who made a brief appearance. After dinner, Elizabeth offers a tour of the palace to Jackie. They share shortcuts, dogs, and philosophies, finding some common ground on the way. Elizabeth tells Margaret all about it, but finds out that Jackie didn't have very nice things to say about the palace or Elizabeth. Macmillan must later tell Elizabeth that Kennedy has pulled out of the Volta Dam project in Ghana because Nkrumah has stayed in touch with the Russians. Despite warnings of it being unsafe and provocative, the Queen makes plans to visit Ghana herself to try and turn Nkrumah away from the Russians. The plane ride is full of disagreements from Philip, and Nkrumah uses the press when the Queen arrives to his advantage. Even worse, The call from Macmillan confirms that she has been played, at least as far as that appearance goes. For the next dinner engagement, Elizabeth comes up with her own plan to try and set things straight. Charteris gives the play-by-play to Macmillan on the phone as Elizabeth dances with Nkrumah, easing tensions and with an implied promise of what that dance means. In the U.S., Bobby Kennedy introduces his brother, John, who gives a speech and then takes lots of pictures with pretty girls. Jackie's so pleased with this that she's ready to go to the farm for the weekend on a Wednesday. Jack and Bobby tell her that if she hadn't insulted the Queen, then the Queen might not have gone to Ghana, so that makes Jackie a foreign policy diva 2 times over. It's really not a great conversation in actuality. On the way home from Ghana, Adine is evidently putting together an achievement scrapbook for the Queen, and she doesn't mind checking it out, so long as it's positive. Then the Queen receives news of an upcoming lunch with Jackie Kennedy and meets that news lukewarmly. Jackie comes to Windsor Castle, where she gets a show of ceremonial power from the Queen and several of her Queen's Guard. She ends up apologizing for her words that got back to the Queen and explains some of the things going on with her behind the scenes, including jealousy and drugs. Later, with Philip, Elizabeth tells the rest of the story that Jackie had started and how instead of reaching out to Jackie and supporting her, she actually kind of savored her own victory. Philip assures her that she did the right thing. We then see the events of November 23, 1963, through the eyes of the royal family and the court. We see Jackie come back with President Kennedy's body as the Queen Mother and Elizabeth watch. Elizabeth notices Jackie's clothes, but then goes to Adine and orders the bell be rung at Westminster Abbey, despite the fact that that is usually reserved just for deaths of members of the royal family, and then begins to write a letter to Jackie. So I'll just start off real quick. Again, sound design is my technical shout out for this particular episode. It's not really even so much the technique of it so much, just the way that they placed it, because as the camera's closing in on Elizabeth from behind, while Macmillan and Adine are both saying, no, you can't go. You can't go to Africa. But she's so determined, and you hear the airline already in the shot before you get to the airplane, and you know that she's going to go. You don't need much of a reminder otherwise. So that's my technical shout out. Holly, let's start off with you this time. What did you like about this particular episode?
This episode had a lot of sad stuff in it, but it also had the most amount of funny moments in it as well. I really liked when JFK and Jackie come to the palace and they just fumble the greeting to the Queen, and Michael Dean is just there like keeping score basically the whole time. President first, and it's like nope, it's like no, they didn't curtsy, nope, that was the wrong terms, and like they're in bloody shambles. I thought that was really funny.
And you couple that with the Charteris play-by-play on the phone while she's dancing with Nkrumah.
Yes.
And just like the heir and the spare are having a heck of a time this episode. It's fun.
Right. And even before that, I think it's Elizabeth and her mother are watching the television, and it's like a nice little real life family moment where they have to like beat the TV when it gets staticky. and then Elizabeth said something weird, like, be careful, it's a rental. Why are they renting a TV? They can't, they're the royal family, they can't afford their own TV? That was confusing.
Well, my impression, weren't they at a different house than Buckingham at that point? I just figured that if they're not going to be in a, like a Windsor or a Balmoral or somewhere, I just figured if they're not going to be there all the time, why buy a TV when you can just rent one for the couple days that you're going to be there?
Well, maybe so. And then right immediately after, the Queen Mother is eating mac and cheese and says it's heavenly. And I'm just like, yeah, it is. Like, who doesn't love mac and cheese? I don't know. I thought there was some like nice light moments in this episode that had a lot of heavy stuff.
Love it. Stephanie, how about you?
Okay, so first, I really liked that episode. I liked Jackie and JFK. I'm very interested in them as a couple. But I thought Michael C. Hall's portrayal of JFK was insane. I I remember watching this when it first came out, and my husband and I were just like, what is he doing? Like, because Michael C. Hall as Dexter obviously doesn't have like a fake Massachusetts Boston accent. And
Yeah.
Michael C. Hall tried to put one on for it, and it was weird. And I feel like it changed halfway through. And then
Yes.
just seeing his like Botoxed Hollywood face was like, it just threw me off completely and kind of took me out of it a little bit. But yeah, his accent was just insane. And I just remember my surprise and like dumbfoundedness did not change watching it again.
So what you're saying is that Michael C. Hall Dexterized his role, is what you're saying.
I think he did.
Chopped it up into little pieces.
Yeah, he tortured us with that terrible Boston accent.
Send your hate mail to @double, the letters PHQ on Twitter.
And I feel like Boston isn't like that difficult. Like most people can at least imitate a Boston accent, like park the car. Like you can, I think it's pretty doable, at least as American accents go. But it was just crazy.
Love
Right.
it.
They needed Boston Rob to play Jay.
They did need Boston Rob.
Matt, what I want to talk about with this episode is I almost want to call it seemingly happy ending. With The Crown, what's so funny is I mentioned that this family is being torn apart. They're under such stress. These characters are under such stress. But this trip to Ghana and everything that went through it, I think it was just happy. I loved seeing the Queen Elizabeth succeed. It was a high. It came through to me as an audience member to be like, yeah, heck yeah, you go, Queen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. In the reality of things, it didn't really do that much in actual history. Nkrumah continued to court the Soviets and then, of course, was overthrown. But the whole idea of that moment, and it did get a lot of press, evidently, in history, so that's good. Just knowing the history of it a little bit, it kind of took me out of feeling the same sense of victory that you did. What I did feel, which of course was all dramatization as far as I can tell, but what I did feel was the pain. It does feel like a victory for her in the end because of the pain that she feels at the beginning. She's feeling like she's so much older. Here's this woman who is her age essentially and seems so much younger, and the way that makes her feel insecure and everything, and really drives her to do this. That is a good dramatic story. At the same time, at the beginning of the episode, or after you hear about the things that Jackie did say about the Queen, you don't know whether you really like her very much. Although you can feel like you really understand her when she's having that conversation with the Queen. You don't really feel that much for her, though, or I didn't anyway, until you get to that scene with her and Jack Kennedy and his brother Bobby, where they're essentially talking about what the Queen did and her wanting to just get away from everything. Jack Kennedy putting his hands on girls in ways that he shouldn't have been doing. This is the seedy side, I think, of, sorry to be cynical, but I think this is the seedy side of many politicians that I'm glad they took the time to address, even if, that particular evening or whatever didn't actually happen in history. We all know of the history of Jack Kennedy in terms of probably womanizing during his ascension to the presidency and after he got there.
What I found also interesting about this episode, and whether or not it's true or not, I don't know, is the implied or almost outright stated the drug use between the Kennedys, that they get cocktails of stuff injected into them and stuff, and they're kind of amped up when then they are drugged up and stuff. And we know JFK had a lot of health problems. Yeah,
that's what I had always heard. Is that he had so many health problems. He was on a lot of painkiller medications. If he was president today, he'd probably be addicted to OxyContin, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was the 60s, so. I don't know.
No.
It's not that surprising to me with the drug use. Kind of going back to what Elizabeth did in Ghana, I really like that this time around she did not listen to all of the advice that she was given, and at least in the show, she went and she did what she felt was right, and we don't get to see her do that very often, and I feel like that's what makes it even more of a victory for me, watching her just ignore everybody and doing what she believed to be right and succeeding. So
I love that you bring that up because, Holly, for me, this particular episode is the moment where Elizabeth finally starts to arrive as the person who is the queen. I mean, she had all of this. We've seen a season and a half of her dealing with situations that she doesn't know how to deal with. And here at the end of this particular episode, she says, we're going to ring the bell at Windsor, at the Abbey for the president. That's the kind of take charge queen that I think we all picture her to be in real life. So,
yes, agree.
Who are other world leaders that we need to see the queen dancing with? Let's go back in time. We're gonna Back to the Future this, and we're gonna have her dance with so many world leaders and just resolve a lot of problems.
Boy.
King Louis, pick one.
You're right. I want to be like you, Queen. You mean that, King Louis? Wabadoo, wakadoo-badoo.
In my personal fanfic, her and Gorbachev had a dance somewhere in there before Russia fell. Yeah.
Yeah, hold on. The Iranian hostage crisis, if, this is the late 70s, if she gets out there and with the Ayatollah says, do the hustle.
Annoyed with Phil once again for just obviously hitting on Jackie. And I mean, Phil continues to be Phil in this episode, and even goes as far as to tell JFK, is like, you are the luckiest man in the world. And it's, shut up, please. Oh my God. Enough. I'll have nicer things to say about Phil in the next episode, but yeah.
Speaking of that next episode, let's get into Season 2, Episode 9, Peter Familia, which was written by Tom Edge and Peter Morgan, directed by Stephen Daldry. It's definitely the story of the double Fs.
Double Fs?
Philip Falterings.
No.
Audience, this is when you groan.
We start off with Prince Charles suffering from double G.
Double G.
That's gridiron gelidity.
That's not a double.
That totally is. That gelidity starts with a G. Look it up. It means icy, feeling icy. And reports of his troubles at school are surfacing. Eton College is suggested for secondary school for Charles, and he writes a letter to his Uncle Dickie, Mountbatten, regarding Eton College. Mountbatten writes back and gets Charles a tailor. Elizabeth and Philip compare sailing and horse racing terminology before comparing Eton to Gordonston regarding Charles. They settle on Philip's choices of school so long as he gets to be the one to tell Charles. It goes about as expected, meaning not so well. This causes Philip to flashback, I think that's a double F, to his own trying on of the Gordonston jumper, Nazis, flying with his sister to Scotland, and arriving at Gordonston. Back in the present, Philip flies. It's definitely a double F, right?
Not even close.
It works for catfish. Anyway, Philip flies Charles to Scotland and takes him to Gordonston. Memories of walls and windows, that's a double W, flood back to Philip as Charles is given his quarters. As the press reviews Charles's school, both Elizabeth and Uncle Dickie don't like it much. Prince Charles's first rainy night does not go so well. Neither did Philip's first morning, evidently, as we flash back, when young Philip must prove himself with a cold run and a cold shower. He also gets a tour of the lake after he refuses to work. After a pep talk from the schoolmaster, he calls his sister, wanting to come home. She'll have him home soon, she says. We then go to Charles having a cold run for himself in the present. Uncle Dickie comes with cookies and tells Charles it's okay to express himself regarding the school. Charles keeps quiet, but also keeps the cookies. Now Elizabeth wants to bring Charles home, but Philip is having none of it. He basically says he'll leave her if she brings Charles home. Charles himself is preparing for the annual challenge because that's what Daddy expects. The schoolmaster talks to Charles about participating and how Philip struggled at the school too. We then go to another double F.
Double F.
Philip flashback. Come on, guys, just once. Where Philip gets his revenge on the kid who threw him in the lake, but gets chewed out by the schoolmaster for doing so. He's prevented from going home, and his sister must actually fly again. Philip's sister plane crashes, and the schoolmaster has to tell young Philip. Young Philip imagines the plane crash and the crash site finding his sister. He goes to row a boat, and the schoolmaster Han tells him that they will be his family. As Mozart's Requiem in D minor plays, Philip attends the funeral, and so does Louis Uncle Dickie Mountbatten. Philip sees his mother, but his father chews him out for being the reason that his sister Cecile was on the plane. That's not a double S. On the way back to Scotland, Dickie gives Philip advice about fathers. Philip returns and starts working on the gate, and doesn't stop. Han won't help him unless he asks for help, and then every student comes to his aid when he does. Back in the present day, Philip comes to attend the annual challenge, which Charles is not doing well at. When Charles hasn't returned, the royal guard goes after him. Philip asks the schoolmaster for more time before starting the awards presentation in hopes that Charles will finish. In the end, Philip begins the presentation before Charles is brought back by the guard. On the plane ride home, Philip tells Charles that it's okay that he didn't finish, but Charles is actually more disturbed by the airplane's turbulence. Philip ends up yelling at Charles, and by the time they return home, Elizabeth can see the rift between father and son. Ending titles tell us that Charles continued to go to Gordonston, but later described it as a living hell. They also tell us that he sent his own sons to Eton College, not Gordonston. Just going to start off real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Stephanie. I want to give my technical shout out to whoever planned the black sheep. To have the black sheep cross in front of the car when Cecile was bringing Philip to Gordonston. What a wonderful visual metaphor for the way that Philip has always felt in regards to his relationship with the royal family. Loved that. That was a fantastic little subtle cue as to the way that Philip perceived himself to be, at least in this story. Stephanie, what do you got?
This episode was one of the most memorable from what I remember watching it the first time when it came out. I didn't know the story about Prince Philip's, basically like most of his family dying in a plane crash. And he was so young at that time. I think he was 16. And then his father may or may not have blamed him for causing that. It made me see Philip in a different light. I definitely felt bad for him because he lost so much, and then his mother went crazy, and then he was really close with his sister, and just all of his nephews died, and like it's just like horrible. And I didn't know that he had that in his past, and I don't know. Like I said, it kind of made me a Philip sympathizer.
It does make you feel at least bad for him for what happened to him as a kid, for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, regardless of how you feel like this character has turned out in the television show. Yeah, kid had a rough start, or at least a rough teenage stretch, for sure. Holly, what do you got for me?
Let's see, I have in my notes, I was like, Philip is an arrogant little shit, like at the beginning when he first gets there. So like there's still, there's an essence of him that hasn't really changed that much, but it is an extremely sad tale. It's complicated. I do feel bad for Philip, but I also am mad at him for putting Charles through the same thing he went through to try and toughen him up when clearly Charles is not the same as his father. And it hurt watching him just make that maybe not the best parenting choice, at least for Charles. And I Googled it. All of the boys went there. Edward and Andrew also went to Gordonston the whole time. So it wasn't just Charles that got picked on, but regardless, it it was heartbreaking. I really liked how they paralleled the timelines together, so you kind of are going back and forth and watching both of them go through the journey together, even though it's different. But I feel worse for Charles at the end than I do feel bad for Phil. I'm glad that Philip was able to overcome his grief and build that wall. That was really moving. I loved all of that, but I still felt worse for Charles at the end, especially when he's getting yelled at on the plane ride home. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you this: there's one character in this particular story for me that actually I don't like. I don't like Louis Mountbatten much at all. I don't think very much of him. But if you notice, in both situations, with young Philip and with Charles, he's very good with kids. I mean, he knew exactly how to write letters to Charles to make him feel good about what was going on when he came and visited him. Even let him keep the cookies. That's a double C, right? And it definitely, he knows how to relate probably to kids better than he does to adults in some ways. I feel like he's kind of like the royal kind of displaced royal family member version of Fred Rogers. It just seems to me like he always knows the right thing to say to the kids. Even when he was talking to Philip about, you're going to be a father someday and your son might not forgive you for something. All of that stuff was just fantastic. And this writing of letters, not to spoil too much, but it's been categorized in history that Charles and Lord Mountbatten did write a lot of correspondences back and forth to each other. So that's something to look forward to as well in future seasons.
I did not like those words that Dickie left him with about being a father one day and knowing the mistakes. I felt those were really unencouraging words to hear in that moment. But I get what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to be there for him and establish a relationship with him. So I think it's sweet, but I'm also a little cautious because I feel like Dickie's kind of a manipulator too. I'm still not forgetting about how he wanted to make the royal family, like the children, be named Mountbatten instead of Windsor. And so I still kind of feel like his motivations are a little bit selfish. And I can't help but think that he's just beginning to work on Charles now to try to be able to manipulate him in the future.
All right, fair enough. Bubba, what did you think about this particular episode?
I love this episode as well. And for me, it just talks about how we as a species sometimes don't like to admit that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person. The solutions to our problems are A, but sometimes A will not work for person B. And to see the difference between Prince Philip and his son Prince Charles, it was very fascinating. It was tough, and I'm not a parent, but it was tough to see a parent who definitely wanted to kind of pass along something that meant a lot to him, to his son, and to see his son suffer and not kind of learn the lessons or kind of take on the challenges he did. I thought it was fascinating, and it really made me, the one I felt most sorry for was Prince Charles, who it's like his dad is trying to exorcise his own demons by making his son live through this again. And man, oh man, I've heard, once again, I've only watched season 2, but I've heard that the show sometimes treats Prince Charles rather poorly or paints him in a negative light, his character. But in this episode, I felt for the kid. It was tough to watch.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, you brought up Prince Charles did take on a different tone, or he didn't send his sons to Gordonston. So Prince Charles has Prince William and Prince Harry, and their mother was Princess Diana, and they sent their sons to Eton, which is a prestigious boys' school, I think in London. But so Charles didn't carry on the tradition. And I think Diana had a lot to do with that, but I think he probably also didn't want to inflict the same pain on his kids like his dad did to him. But now we see what's going on with Harry and Charles, and that's a whole nother story in the news right now. But
Yeah. One of the things also that I found really interesting about this, in regards to Philip especially, is that as an adult, he doesn't seem to be the person who asks for help. at least in this story. He does, and that seemed to be the central thing about him building that wall was, he finally asked for help. I thought that was the big lesson to learn, but Philip in this show hasn't learned that lesson, essentially. Nor is he telling Charles that he will help him if Charles asks for help. That seemed to be the big dramatic moment, right? When the kids come out and help him with the gate.
You're opening my eyes, Matt, because I didn't see the asking for help as being the big kind of lesson that Prince Philip took from it. I think Prince Philip took from it, things get tough, persevere, keep going.
Yeah.
Even if you ask for assistance, keep going. The task has to get done. So it's interesting you said that, and I want to go back and watch that final bit to see what broke young Prince Philip.
It was the gate.
Yeah, he couldn't
do
lift
the gate by himself. Oh, I got one other point. And this is just pure speculation, so qualify it as that, but Han was shouting out to him after his sister had died and everything. He goes off and he goes rowing in that boat. And we've seen all kinds of shots in this show. And I'm not speaking about Philip as a real person, but Philip as a character. We see all these kinds of shots of Philip loving being in the Navy, loving being in a ship and everything. And it was when he was rowing a boat in this particular episode as a kid, when he was told that he had a home, that he had a family. I wonder if something subliminal in this character again clicked in Philip and drew him to being in the Navy, as well as Louis Mountbatten.
That's interesting. I'm glad you pointed that out because I was actually making more of the pilot connection from this episode and why he wanted to learn how to fly from back in season 1. And I think that was like his unconscious way of wanting to be able to like save his sister and his family. So both of those things really do tie back to how his family stuff. That's awesome. I like that, Matt.
Yeah, I like that too, because he really liked being in the Navy and was really pissed when he had to leave.
He really was. He wanted Elizabeth to stay at Double M.
Double M?
Malta Mother. Well, I got one laugh out of it. Well, let's move on to another Double M.
Double M?
Mystery Man. That's season 2, episode 10, written by Peter Morgan and directed. Oh, there it is. That's what we were waiting for. Season 2, episode 10, Mystery Man, written by Peter Morgan and directed by Benjamin Caron. The episode starts with a Philip workout to the tune of Man of Mystery by The Shadows. That workout turns out to be a pain in the neck that ends with a visit to an osteopath. Stephen Ward, that osteopath, helps Philip with his neck and identifies possible causes. They have Mike Parker in common. That can't be good. Ward then invites Philip to a, quote, party. We skip ahead to a future time when one of the girls in the picture on Ward's mantle, by the name of Kristen Keeler, is being interviewed while Macmillan, that's Qyburn, of course, is hunting. After implications that she might have been a Soviet spy, they ask her who the mystery man is in a picture taken. Back to that in a second. Meanwhile, Macmillan has a frank conversation with John Perfumo, to which John says, "Don't call me Frank." Macmillan tells his wife about it when asked, implicating her continued affair with Sir Boothby. Macmillan goes in front of the press and defends Perfumo about the charges that are being alleged against him. Elizabeth has to tell Aunt Marina to chill and let Margaret do a bigger renovation than Philip did on Clarence's house, evidently. And Philip isn't the only one going to a doctor. Elizabeth has her own doctor tell her that she's expecting again, but this time they have to be cautious because she's getting older. She goes to tell Philip, but he's already off for a weekend party on a Wednesday. Seems to be a running theme in this season. Stephen Ward gets arrested and sees Kristen Keeler, and she sees him. As news spreads about the arrest, Tony Armstrong-Jones overhears that Perfumo is expected to resign. Elizabeth is finding Margaret's renovations a little overwhelming. Plus, Margaret is also expecting a child. The two of them discuss the renovations. Margaret points out a rumor that the mystery man in the photo might actually be Philip, And then we move to Macmillan, who briefs the Queen about Perfumo. Macmillan tries to resign, but she won't let him, as she'll need a leave of absence herself, going to Scotland so that she can have her baby. Next, Dorothy Macmillan tells Harold about a theater review called Beyond the Fringe, making fun of the Queen and him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is headed to Balmoral, and Philip is headed to St. Moritz. She lets that idea get under her skin a bit. In a montage of scenes, Macmillan sees the review, the press criticizes everything government, Elizabeth travels, Ward has his trial, Ward kills himself, and the police go through the stuff in his apartment. Hadden gets a phone call about what the police found and has to tell the Queen about Philip's connection to Ward. Hadden tries to handle the press while Elizabeth does some snowstorm standing. That's definitely a triple S. Then Macmillan resigns and Elizabeth comes to see him. Now Macmillan insists on resigning and suggests Alex Douglas Home as his successor. Elizabeth gives him a good scolding. Philip comes home to find Margaret and Tony trying to offer support to Elizabeth for the appointment, which has caused a stir in the papers and the public. Philip gets his scolding from Margaret and heads to Balmoral. He spends several days in the doghouse while Elizabeth is spending time in the guest house. He tries to offer support and she refuses. He asks for a list of charges and she asks about Ward. While Philip denies knowing what she's talking about, she outlines the many portraits of him that had to be purchased discreetly to hide his association with the osteopath. She asks about the weekend away, the mystery man in the newspaper. He denies it all. When he starts coming back at her about all of it, she finally plays the Galina Olenova card from the beginning of the season, and he is suddenly quiet. But then he explains the promise he made to her father, and they begin to talk about building on their marriage instead of making accusations. As a boys' choir sings, Prince Edward is born with Philip present. Christenings happen, and Cecil tells another fairy tale as he takes family photos. Family photos. Is that a double F? Spoiler alert, it's the last time we're ever going to see all of this cast together in one place, and some of this cast ever again.
We hear you, Matt. We wish we didn't, but we hear you.
There it is. Stephanie, once again, let's let you lead off since you're our guest here.
Sure. So this one was one of the less memorable ones for me, at least. But as I said, I think at the beginning of the podcast, this is where we have Double P.
Double P?
Philandering Philip.
Oh.
Yeah.
So this ballerina, I think she was a part in the earlier season, or maybe it was just from this episode.
You are correct. She was in the very first episode. It was her picture that Elizabeth originally found in Philip's briefcase when she was going to leave the camera for him as he was going on his trip to Australia.
Yes.
That's Galina Olvanov.
Okay. So that's what, I remember that, and that's the most famous philandering Philip that I think that we get, and that actually was picked up like in the news stories, but he usually was pretty on the down low, I think. So
something that I found interesting about that alleged relationship is she would have been a lot older than him. She was born in 1910. She was well into her. I think she was in her 40s when she performed in London for that particular ballet that Elizabeth went and saw her at. She did actually perform at that ballet a few times in London, but she would have been older than him by 7 or 8 years, maybe.
Man, him and group captain Peter Townsend, they need to get together so they can, find the median
find
age
a happy
they're
medium.
supposed to be. Right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So that was, out of all of those alleged ones of Philip, that's the one that I kind of discounted the most.
Really?
When I was doing the math, but you're right. It was suspected for sure. Absolutely.
I felt a little bad for Macmillan in this episode. Poor guy. His wife is awful. I mean, it's one thing to have an affair, like she's just openly having an affair, but she just is constantly mocking him, and it's kind of messed up. I do appreciate that he does try to go and watch the play or the satire about him, and he was okay with it. Like, he was even laughing at himself a little bit until they realized he was in the audience, and then it turned, and it felt like they were directly attacking him, and I felt like that was a little bit over the line, and I would
way to
definitely
go,
have been
Peter
hurt.
Cook. Shame on you, Peter Cook.
I would have been hurt if I was him, honestly, because he was doing okay. He was having a laugh at himself up until that point, so I don't know.
Okay.
What's interesting is that this, once again, I always talk about here in America growing up. I took American history in my high school, junior high, that kind of stuff. But what's interesting is this scandal, I kind of remember because it keeps getting covered. I remember there was a movie called Scandal back in 1989 with Joanne Whalley-Kilmer, I believe, who was the star, who was the woman at the center of this scandal. And it is kind of a big, obviously it was a big moment. But for me, I really thought, in some ways I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great to have scandals this innocent again? Maybe it isn't that innocent. Maybe there are, if the Russians were only involved in this instead of other things they're rumored about, poisoning dissidents and people who speak out against them, this felt like a gentler scandal, if you can say such a thing.
Well, speaking of scandal, Stephanie, do you believe what Philip says to Elizabeth at the end of this particular episode? Regarding how he's always been about Elizabeth. Did you believe him when he said that?
No, no, I didn't.
Okay.
Well, now that I say that, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the real Prince Philip, but the Prince Philip in The Crown is definitely not all about Elizabeth.
Yeah.
He's a lot about Philip.
I think the show did a really good job of making this something for us to decide, which is why I think we need to ask the question.
Yeah. It is a good question, and I mean, I believe that he had some dalliances, that he wasn't. Yeah, I believe that part. So I guess that's my answer.
Okay, fair enough. Holly, I know what you're going to say, right?
I believe Elizabeth, and Elizabeth, I think Elizabeth knows the truth, as she kind of said she turned a blind eye to a lot of his behaviors, and I like the way they end this. I really feel like Philip comes around and maybe understands the consequences of his actions, whether he took them or not, or just even the consequences of being involved with people who were controversial. And I think him coming back around to Elizabeth, I believed that. I'll give him credit. I really started to believe him here, and it felt genuine. And when they have that moment, I really like the end scene with them together. It was very quiet. There was no music, just like long looks and quiet scenes. But I thought it was really sweet at the end as they're kind of holding each other, and as he's watching her give birth, and he's just completely amazed at what she's doing. I don't know why she had to wait for their fourth child to feel this way, but it was really sweet and moving.
It's funny, in this particular set of 5 episodes, we see 2 births, and one, Philip's off playing racquetball. So there is a definite difference between, that's a double D, between him and in the episode when Edward is born, or Andrew is born, as opposed to this episode when Edward is born. I'm going to say this too, Bubba. I'm going to say that I do feel bad for Macmillan often, but the way he tried to bail out of the prime ministership, I loved the fact that the Queen gave him the rub on that and basically said a confederacy of elected quitters. I loved that. I thought that was fantastic. I thought that he deserved that for making that decision rather than trying to tough it out. Although there are considerations, I suppose. You could say that, well, he was thinking of his party. He didn't want it, even though if you look at history, his party lost the very next election that they had, even after Alec Douglas Home was appointed in his place. How'd you feel about Macmillan?
As soon as he went to that comedy club with Dudley Moore and Peter Cook, I thought, this isn't going to go well. And I did feel sorry for him. The one thing you say is that people they make their beds and they lie in them. And in what's tough is when their beliefs, when their own kind of value system says, I can't I can't divorce this wife who no longer loves me and I no longer love her. I can't do these things, which kind of would make everything a whole lot easier if you just did them. And so I felt sorry for him. I think this is a bizarre scandal to take him down, but in the end, he stayed on too long. A scandal like this was coming in such a puritanical, and here we're America, I'm talking about puritanical type value system they had. And so, it was going to catch up. Something was going to catch up with them sooner or later.
Yeah. If he didn't nip the whole Perfumo thing in the bud immediately, if he'd have taken the moment to not believe Perfumo when Perfumo said, I didn't do this. I didn't do any of this. If he'd have said, well, you're going to step down now.
Right.
I think he might have survived the whole thing. But he didn't make the right decision at the right time.
We have politicians now in this country who I think believe, possibly with good reason, that you just kind of wait out a scandal. Okay, a scandal's about to sink you. Just wait it out. See if you can wait it out and people get fascinated by some other problem. It didn't work then, and in a lot of ways, we hope it doesn't work now.
Yeah. Speaking of that, let's get into the history of this particular stretch of episodes. Season 2, Episode 9, Paterfamilias. This is when 1934 to 1939 is when Philip attended Gordonston. Same episode on November 15th, 1937 is when Philip's sister Cecile died in the plane crash. In Vergangenheit, the Margot files, the documents were discovered at Marburg Castle in 1945. And then among the documents are the details of the Nazis' devised plan of Operation Willy, is what that operation was called. The documents were leaked to the British government, and they did try to suppress them. In 1946, Britain, France, and the United States agreed to work together to process the Marburg files, appointing top historians from each country to oversee the project. Those were the people that we saw in the episode. Despite those efforts by the British, the Americans released the documents first in 1957. In the same episode, when Billy Graham came to England, his most famous of his crusades to the UK was 1956. He has met the Queen. I couldn't find a date on when exactly it was, but it is mentioned that he did. It may have even been later than when he came to the UK in 56, but that was the time period of his crusades that best fits with this particular storyline. Paterfamilias, back at episode 9 again. That's when Charles was attending Cheam Preparatory School from 1958 to 1962. So we see him, I guess the schoolmaster of that school urging him to go to, it's when they're going to try to decide to send him to Eton. But then he went to Gordonston from 62 to 66. Season 2, episode 7, Matrimonium, the UK elections, that we see the Fry threesome watch. They occurred on October 8th, 1959. Season 2, Episode 7, Matrimonium. Also, Prince Andrew was born on February 19th, 1960. And the royal marriage between Margaret and Anthony Armstrong-Jones occurred on May 6th, 1960. We get to the Dear Kennedy episode, February 20th, 1961. That's when Brezhnev visited Ghana. We saw a brief shot of that in the episode. Dear Mrs. Kennedy, also, the Kennedys visit the Queen on June 5th, 1961. And there was a report in the Telegraph that the writer claimed that Kennedy was unimpressed by the palace furnishings and by the Queen's dress and hairstyle. So that's where they came up with the whole idea of that. In Dear Mrs. Kennedy, again, the Queen's visit to Ghana. She did dance with Nkrumah. She was there in Ghana from November 9th to the 20th in 1961. And as far as the Foxtrot reference goes, found out something interesting about this. The Foxtrot was the only Western dance there wasn't an African dance that Nkrumah knew. And it had actually been taught to him before by Louis Armstrong's wife, which I thought
Heck yeah.
That's so cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Good work.
Season 2, Episode 10, Mystery Man, June 5th, 1963, is when the British Secretary of War, John Perfumo, resigned amid the sex scandal. And same episode, October 18th, 1963, is when Harold Macmillan resigned as prime minister. The next day, October 19th, 1963, Alec Douglas Home became the new prime minister. He was appointed. We go then back to the episode 8, which, of course, occurs at the end here. We're at November 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated. And in case you're wondering why the Queen was thinking Jackie left the dress on intentionally, Jackie was actually later quoted as saying she left it on to show them what they had done. She wanted the blood on her dress, and that was the thing that Elizabeth was trying to point out. That's why they were trying to point that out in the episode, which I thought was a good human touch for that. Season 2, Episode 10, Mystery Man, March 10th, 1964 is when Prince Edward was born. And Season 2, Episode 10, Mystery Man, May 2nd, 1964 is when Edward was christened at Windsor Castle, and we saw those christenings as well. We'll put all of the links for the information, how I got it and what have you, in the show notes for you. And now, after I've exhausted everybody talking about these episodes in history, let's get to a fun game once again. We call this one One Lump or Two. Which character needs more sugar in their tea in order to sweeten them up? Which one is the more grumpy one? Our poll results from the last podcast that we did. Who needs extra sugar in their tea? Anthony Eden or Harold Macmillan? 77.8% of you out of 900 votes on the 100 Twitter voted for Macmillan. Also, who needs extra sugar in their tea? Billy Wallace, someone who's being dragged to a duel, or Tony Armstrong-Jones, someone who only works with submissive subjects. There were 700 votes on the 100 Twitter. It's almost like 7 of you voted, and it's almost like 5 out of 7 of you, or is it 6 out of 7? It's almost like 6 out of 7 of you voted.
Who said there'd be math?
For Tony Armstrong-Jones. The final poll, who needs extra sugar in their tea? Queen Elizabeth, upon hearing Lord Altercombe's critiques, or Queen Mother Elizabeth for seeing the power of the crown being stripped away. 1,000 votes on the 100 Twitter. It's almost like 6 out of 10 of you voted for the Queen Mother. This time around, we've got some questions. Who needs more sugar in their tea? Should we go the same way that we did before and just start with Bubba, you ask the questions, Stephanie and Holly will argue, and I will be the judge.
Heck yeah. So let's talk about the new characters. And I want to talk about specifically young Prince Philip, who was there building the gate in the wall at school, or his son, young Prince Charles, who can't complete the race. Who needs that bit of sugar? The father who's bitter and he's going to build that gate in the rain? Or the son who just wasn't made for days like this? What do you think, Holly?
Ooh, I'm gonna go with Charles needs a little more sugar, because that poor kid. He was not going to learn the lesson that Gordonstone wants to teach about fighting through the pain to become the savior and using and embracing that. That's not his life. As Philip tells him, this isn't real life when he's like sitting down having dinner while the servants are cutting every bit of his food and placing it on his plate for him. So I think Charles needs a little bit more sugar in his tea. I know he's already spoiled, but that's my answer.
Stephanie, how is Philip needing that extra lump of sugar?
Philip needs that extra lump of sugar because Charles is, I know he's just a kid in this episode, but he is an absolute insufferable. Oh my God. Charles is the worst.
Oh, heck yeah. Attack those kids, Stephanie.
Oh, no.
Stephanie, I'm sick of this pro-kid bias this show has had. All right.
I do not like Charles ever, and so Team Philip.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
Heck yeah. How about puppies? How do you feel about that?
I'm a cat person, so.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, man, there it is. Puppies are evil. Oh, there it is. You heard it first here on Podcast Lilibet. Stephanie says puppies are evil. I got to vote for this, right? I got to judge. I hate kids too, Stephanie. I'm going to go with
Oh, my God.
Okay.
So next up, let's see. I get to ask the question this time around. Here is my question for Bubba and then Holly. Who needs more sugar in their tea? The person who buys Tony's train tickets because they're third class because he doesn't have the status of the rest of the family? Or the person who came up with the royal announcement protocols that kept Margaret from being able to announce her wedding before Peter Townsend?
Whoever came up with those protocols, I want to tip my cap to them. Anything to prevent her from marrying this jerk, I'm happy with. Good work, protocol man. So I guess the person who needs the lump of sugar, you know what? I'm going to give it to the person who came up with the protocols. Anything to prevent this marriage that on the show gave me a lot of pause. I'm giving them some sweetness. Here you go. Here's a lump of sugar, baby, just for you.
Holly, how is the person who booked Tony's train tickets third class? How does he need more sugar?
I don't know. This is such a bad choice. The only reason I could justify giving the person who booked Tony's train tickets third class is because he was forced to by his evil mother. And it seems like anybody who would have to deal with Tony's mother just like is going to need a pick-me-up after having to deal with her. So that's my answer. I mean, that she's probably like a Karen, when she's buying those tickets, probably made that person's day awful. And they need some sweetness to make their day better.
Excellent.
I'm going to go. The royal protocols have been there forever, so I'm going with the person who booked Tony's train ticket because that was just so jerky.
That was jerky. Just put the family together. What the heck does it matter? You can say that the person ultimately responsible was the mother. Yeah, I agree. I don't know. After that poor question of mine, maybe we should just stop playing and get straight to the music. So, as we've been going through this podcast, you've heard me talk a lot about two main themes. One is the anointing theme, which is very associated with Elizabeth herself and her immediate family. One is a theme that we call Duck Shoot, which actually, to me, mostly represents Elizabeth's relationship with the crown and how that affects her relationship with everybody else. You wouldn't think that would be the case by the titles, but that seems to be the way they've mostly been used. There's a theme that was new in season 2 that I feel was focused more on Philip and his relationships to his family, both his blood relatives, who we meet in the 9th episode, and his marital family, the royal family. And we hadn't heard it in season 1, which makes me tend to think that it's something that maybe Mr. Balfe himself came up with, and I don't know if Gregson Williams was helping him with that or not, or if Gregson Williams came up with it, but it just because we have this new composer credited in the credits for season 2, it feels like it might be more of a Balfe theme. I haven't researched it enough to be able to tell you. I actually talked to Mr. Balfe a lot on Twitter via our Dust podcast account because he is the composer for his Dark Materials, but I don't get a chance to catch him that often in DMs. So I probably should just ask him straight up at some point in the future, and if I do, and he gets back to me on it, then I'll update you. In the meantime, this particular theme, as I mentioned, I feel like it's related to Philip and his relatives, both in a blood sense and in a marital sense. And it's represented in the Season 2 official soundtrack called Bound in Duty, which is the first cut on that Season 2 official soundtrack. And in this particular set of episodes, it's heard all over episode 9 when we're dealing with Philip's past and his family and his relationship to Charles. And in episode 10, we hear it also, and it's just focusing on Philip and his ride to Balmoral. And, he's focusing on Elizabeth and getting back to her and figuring out what the heck's going on there. But we actually first heard it all the way back in episode 2 of this season, A Company of Men. That's where it began. And Philip was dealing with some family stuff that was brought up by the Australian reporter. And we heard it just shortly after that is when we first started to hear that theme. He's also dealing with all of these implications about his infidelity to Elizabeth. So there's a lot to make you think that this is really kind of a Philip theme. Just so you remember what I'm talking about as you watch these episodes, it sounds like this. And I'm only going to focus on this particular theme this time around. So I do want to break it down in all of my categories that I like to judge good scoring by. Those are timbre, what instruments are used, melodic shape, meaning how high or low the melody goes and what kind of story that tells, harmony, and rhythm. Now, rhythmically, there's not that much to talk about, so we'll kind of play that one down a little bit. Let me go back to timbre, because timbre is the instruments that are used. And what's very interesting is that in most of the presentations of this theme throughout this season, the melody itself is presented by some kind of low woodwind instrument. If you go all the way back to our introduction podcast, which we don't have on the Double P feed because I used actual clips from the show on that, and there are regulations in regards to the YouTube for Double P and what have you, so I can't bring that one back to the main Double P feed. So you'll just have to find the Lilibet feed and listen to that. But when we broke down the main theme, the main architecture presented by Hans Zimmer with the main theme, what we came to realize is that the woodwinds represented Elizabeth a lot. So it seems very interesting that woodwinds, a lower pitched kind of woodwind, like a bass clarinet or something, is the main carrier of this melody. And that's because one of the big relationships of Philip is, of course, his marital status to Elizabeth. That's why he's in this whole family. That's why he's in this series. And so it makes sense to use a woodwind instrument like a bass clarinet or a low oboe or those kinds of instruments to represent Philip as much as it represents his relationship to Elizabeth. So that's important to note. But let's now focus on the actual shape of the melody, one of my other things that I really like to focus on in a score. This one is interesting. When you think about Philip and you think about all of these things that we've learned that make Philip who he is, you find this shape very intriguing because the melody starts on this note, but it also ends on this note. It gets right back to where it started. Now, does that indicate any kind of growth or change? One might say no, but I feel what it represents most in regards to Philip is that it shows that through all of the turbulence that happens in between, and I'll get to that in a second, but through all of the turbulence that happens in between, he is able to find his way back to the place that he believes is right. Now, whether you agree whether that's right or wrong, that's up to you. But in terms of Philip's perspective, which I believe is what Mr. Balfe was doing when he was writing this, it's showing that the shape tells us that Philip's going through some changes, and again, I'll get to that in a second, but he always manages to steady himself. And in a way, that is what George was asking him to do, to be a rock for Elizabeth. And he hasn't always done that in the best way, but in the 10th episode, he seems to think that he has. And so the start and stopping place of this melody is what tells us that from Philip's perspective, no matter how much you rock the boat, he's going to manage to stay on it. How does that boat get rocked, you might ask? Well, if you listen to the entire melody, you'll see that there are big jumps, big leaps from low to high, from high to low. This is what I talk about when I'm talking about melodic shape. It's the distance between notes and which way they go. That's what creates the shape of a melody, which helps to tell the story. And then the harmony gives emotional context to it. But if you listen to this, there are lots of big leaps in this. Those are done by the intervals of sixths. And what I mean by that, you don't have to know any of these terms, but what I mean by that is the jumps in between notes are called intervals. And the distance is what musicians call a sixth, which is a very big stretch for melodies. Not the largest stretch by any stretch, but definitely big stretches. Listen to how high and how low these notes go in relation to each other, following one from the next. Or as in the second half, the boat is getting rocked quite a bit. And so that's what I mean by how important it is that it starts in one place and ends in the same place with all of that going on in between. He survived the storm at sea. Let's just say it like that. The final thing to talk about here is harmony. And again, it's a minor harmony, but the interesting thing is that it shifts back and forth between minor and what we call its relative major, meaning that they're both based on the same scale, but they emphasize different notes that feel like home. Because of that, some of the harmonies are very tense, which we're supposed to feel tension about Philip. And we see that Philip is feeling his own tension. But for instance, you start with this. That's very dissonant. But the next chord or harmony that is implied to the melody after that is this. That's actually a major harmony, not minor, not dissonant. It's a little more resolved, a little more settled. And so there are ebbs and flows of tension and release here. That same kind of thing happens twice in this melody. We get this harmony as well. And that really needs to go somewhere. I feel like it needs to resolve somewhere. And where does it resolve? It resolves here. So ultimately, this piece is minor. It just kind of goes to its relative major. Again, you don't need to know all these terms, but it goes to a place that feels more resolved and then returns back to this more serious, darker place, or a place that can even be considered sad if you have some sympathy for what Philip went through as a child or what he feels like he's going through now. And that's the music section for this week. I'll play that melody one more time here for you so that the next time you watch season 2 of The Crown, you can listen for this theme. Let's get into some feedback. Our Double L loyal listener, Dooley's Left Legs, finally chimed in with some stuff. We love hearing from Dooley's Left Legs. Dang it, I need to skip ahead. I'm always 5 episodes behind, so I don't listen until 2 weeks later. Oh, we're so sorry, Dooley's Left Leg. Catch up. Spend a weekend and just watch all of The Crown. Anyway, Dooley's Left Leg also says, I'm nearly done with season 1. I'm shocked how little I actually knew about the behind-the-scenes history. Matt Smith is a great actor. He's normally so likable, and yet he portrays a pretentious prick, that's a double P, so well.
Great.
Yes, he does.
Now, isn't Dooley, help me out, Dooley, aren't you living in the UK? Are you allowed to say that in the UK? Should we turn him into authorities? Boris Johnson, we'll turn you. Here comes Dooley.
Call Tommy.
Right. Yes, well, this person said this thing. Let's make sure they get punished. Throw them in the tower immediately.
I'll flick their head.
3472. Dooley's Left Legs, your feedback is not accepted. We've got another message from Susan at Black Eyed Lily on Twitter. We love her. She appears often on my Before the Dragon podcast covering Game of Thrones and the House of the Dragon, if that's going to ever come out, which will also have Matt Smith in it, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Yay!
So, Bubba, you want to read this first bit from Susan?
Yeah, so Matt, Susan wrote, as podcast Lilibet dove into season 2 of The Crown, I appreciated Bubba. Hey, that's me. going over the additional cast members for the new season. I was a little surprised to hear him say that he was unfamiliar with Claire Foy prior to The Crown. Well, forgive me, I was. Susan wrote, I'd been planning to ask him whether he preferred her performance as Queen Elizabeth in The Crown or Anne Boleyn in Wolf Hall. Oh boy, way to call me out, Susan. I read the novel Wolf Hall and then watched that adaptation, but she disappeared into the role because I didn't recognize her in this. That's a good point. And she's hoping for a sequel to Wolf Hall, which is based on Hilary Mantel's books, and Hilary has written several other stories that follow that bit of English history, and so I bet we will get a sequel. She wrote that she did not recognize the two actors who were both in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Nurl. It's fun that they were both in the same episode of The Crown, especially in a scene together. Bubba and Catfish's podcast for Jonathan Strange, which were called Lost Hope. If you are interested in that great novel by Susanna Clarke, look at our podcast, Lost Hope, in all your favorite podcast apps. But Susan was very nice, saying that our podcast on it was an excellent addition to the miniseries. And they're some of her favorite podcasts by us.
Wow.
Anyone who's a fan of the Jonathan Strange miniseries, do yourself a favor and listen to these podcasts. Heck yeah. Thank you so much, Susan. She also appreciated, now I'm going to mispronounce this, Chloe Peary as Eileen Parker. This actress has been showing up more and more projects that Susan has seen in recent years, and Susan says she always enjoys her. The 2016 BBC adaptation of War and Peace, Amazon's original fantasy, Carnival Row. I haven't seen either of these. This is good. Actually, I think I did see War and Peace. I think I did see War and Peace. The 2020 remake of Jane Austen's Emma. And this actress has a cameo in Netflix's sensation from last summer, The Queen's Gambit. So there's more places you can see Chloe. Oh, boy, look, I love Susan. We love this feedback. Listeners, do like Susan and talk to us. We're trying to make this an interactive podcast besides your groans. Oh, thank you so much. And she's got more, Matt.
She sure does. And by the way, Susan, I did not recognize her in The Queen's Gambit. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that because I loved that particular miniseries. I thought it was fantastic. But Susan goes on to say, this first episode of the season opens with Elizabeth and Philip dealing with the fallout of Parker's breakup and how it reflected on Philip in particular. Margaret almost settles for family friend Billy Wallace just because she felt the need to get married. Of course, that was before Billy demonstrated he took the idea of an open marriage a little too far. This left room for Tony Armstrong-Jones to literally enter the picture with Margaret mid-season. Yes. The problematic marriages of Prime Minister Macmillan and the Mountbattens added additional fuel to the proverbial relationship fires. During the first episode of the season, we had a peek into the Mountbatten home as well, as Lord Mountbatten was being informed of activities surrounding the Suez Crisis. A brief exchange between Dickie Mountbatten and his wife Edwina in this scene appeared very combative, while the later moment between Dickie and Elizabeth suggested he was quite in love with his wife, who said he shared Philip's wild spirit. And she goes on about Lord Mountbatten. Holly, you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, Susan says, I find Lord Mountbatten an intriguing character. While he isn't a direct member of the royal family, he had a significant influence on them. He is Prince Philip's mother's youngest brother. He encouraged the match between Philip and Elizabeth, giving Philip his last name when Philip became a British citizen. It is said that he was like a grandfather to Prince Charles, and he was the very last viceroy to India, overseeing the transition to an independent India. Susan goes on to say, like she did with Queen Mary, she has a YouTube video suggestion for anyone interested in learning a bit more about Lord Mountbatten. I am a little interested. Susan, you can link that to us, please. That would be fantastic. The University of Cambridge YouTube channel hosted a lecture titled The Mountbattens, Their Lives and Loves by Andrew Lowney. Don't need the link. I just found the title for you guys. Sorry. This video was an overview of a book by the same name. Mr. Lowney wrote the book upon the 40th anniversary of Lord Mountbatten's death. I would call it a colorful biography by both Dickie and Edwina, who did indeed have a very open marriage.
Wow. Oh, okay. Hello.
After listening to this podcast, I found the combative exchange between the characters on the show rang rather false. The Crown made a couple of references to Edwina's longtime relationship with the first Indian Prime Minister Nehru, as if it were an embarrassment to Lord Mountbatten. Instead, this biography infers that it was actually something Mountbatten used to his advantage. Ah, there you go.
All right.
In this first episode of season 2, we also hear Mountbatten mention his appointment with the first Sea Lord of the Bravos. Just kidding. The British Navy. Sorry. Old habits die hard, guys. Apparently, the appointment was a real triumph for him. His father had to resign from the very same post due to anti-German sentiment.
Dang.
Susan says, I enjoyed your discussion of Prince Philip and his behavior in these episodes. I have to say that I rolled my eyes when Elizabeth talked about their marriage being quite different than they imagined. I think this is a lot of nonsense. Philip had to have some kind of understanding of what he was getting into when he married the heir to the crown. Doubtless, they hadn't expected her father to die so young, and I'm sure Philip expected a little longer career in the Navy, but he had to understand that Elizabeth was going to become the queen at some point, and it could happen at any time. I have to conclude that a lot of his petulance is just to create dramatic tension for the show. I won't say much about Tony Armstrong-Jones at this point in the story, except that I agree with some of what each of you have said about him. Yes, Matt, there was more of a sense of sexual tension between Tony and Margaret than her previous beaux. However, I also agree with Bubba that underneath that, it felt self-serving for both parties. And yes, Holly, there is something of a predatory feeling about Tony that puts one on notice.
I like that. We're all right.
Yes, it's always good for all of us to be right.
That's the
Nobody
best
goes
feedback
away with
ever.
And it really is.
Here's where I end up being wrong, though, and it's about the Altricum episode, because as you guys know, I was kind of down on that one. The episode with Lord Altricum is one of my favorites, Susan says.
Oh.
I enjoyed your discussion about the issues it raised. The Queen's speech at the Jaguar factory reminded me of a moment in the previous episode when Beaton was taking Margaret's birthday photos. Cecil gave this little speech about how a glamorous photo of Margaret would be the inspiration for the commonplace creature in her drab little scullery to feel better about her dreary life. It felt like the same attitude that came through in that speech by the Queen when she talked about the dull, repetitive work of the average men and women. There's such patronizing attitudes that seem to purvey how they think about regular people that is very off-putting. The televising of the Christmas Day speech put me in the mind of a Downton Abbey episode where Queen Elizabeth's grandfather gave the Christmas speech over radio for the first time. The Queen even referenced this in the episode that his address was 25 years prior. Fun fact, that first radio address was written for King George V by Rudyard Kipling.
Oh.
Well, good work, Kipling.
Yes, the residents of Downton Abbey were concerned that by making the king more accessible to the public, the mystique and reverence for the crown would suffer. This made me realize that this is really a legitimate concern as it crops up in programs that deal with the crown's struggles with how to modernize. So I tried to take this perspective into consideration when the Queen and the Queen Mother appeared to resent the welcoming ordinary citizens into Buckingham Palace. Ironically, this attitude seems directly in conflict with how Queen Mary, the traditionalist, established the regular activity of sponsoring charities and visiting business establishments, like Queen Elizabeth's visit to the Jaguar factory. These activities now make up a prominent part of the Crown's schedule. They were established by Queen Mary to promote popular opinion of the Crown when other monarchies were disappearing. Inviting regular people periodically to meet the Queen seems like a logical extension of this concept. This idea has evolved into the Queen hosting 4 annual garden parties with a cross-section of British citizens. I'm also forwarding a webpage that explains the criteria and process for attending one of those garden parties for your information. And we'll include that in the show notes. Susan, thank you for that wonderful email. Lots of great points in it.
So, Susan, just forward me some tickets. Just forward me some tickets to the garden party. I'd love to go.
And that's going to do it for this particular podcast, as Holly is just aghast. She doesn't know what to think anymore. She's as shocked by my revelation that I hate kids, as she was of the fact that David was a Nazi. Anyway, speaking of which, Holly, how can people talk to you about your terrible, gross error?
Please find me, unfollow me, and block me on Twitter at HuntPants. Just block that handle, and you won't have to hear my dumb takes anymore. Also, I recently was on an episode of Girls Gone Canon where they were covering La Belle Sauvage in the first book of the Book of Dust trilogy by Philip Pullman. If you're familiar with his Dark Materials, it is adjacent to that trilogy. So if that is something else y'all are interested in, you can find me on their most recent episode of Girls Gone Canon. It was super fun to do. Y'all should check them out. They're way better at this than I am.
Love Chloe and Eliana. They came on a rewatch episode with me, and they were super fun, super fabulous, armed with what's worse questions and everything. It was wonderful. They were super cool. Follow them at Girls Gone Canon on Twitter, and be sure to check out that episode with Holly, because I haven't read the book and I had to listen anyway. And man, it was awesome. It was an awesome episode. Holly did a super fun job and brought up some really great points about something that I know nothing about. Loved it. Stephanie, you know a lot about things that I know nothing about as well. So how can people talk to you about your knowledge of the Crown and the English history?
Well, if you want to talk to me about how stupid Charles is and cats, I'm at SM Persephone on Twitter.
Love it. As for our podfather, so to speak, the person who goes through all of the trouble of putting these up on the feed, we need to discuss at Fit and Trim on Twitter, right? How do you spell that again, Bubba?
You can find me on Twitter at Fit and Trim, spelled FITTENTRIM, at Fit and Trim on Twitter. I can't wait to finally dive into season 3 so I can get excited for these next group of podcasts and also meet the new cast of The Crown, which I've been spoiled. Yes, we're going to have new actors playing these roles. Can't wait.
All right. Sounds great. And you can find me at Musical Concepts, or more importantly, at Lilibet Pod, Lilibet Pod on Twitter. Also, be sure to check out all of these things. If you really want to know the lyrics, because you probably couldn't understand them, if you want to know the lyrics to the song that started off this podcast, then simply go and watch the lyrics go by on the YouTube page for Double P. Just search for Double P Media on YouTube. And don't forget, we love tweets. Send them to @double, the letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters. And remember, we only do this because the pod is the job.
I'm not going to let you be able to marry Lady Stephanie after she insulted children and dogs on this episode. Stephanie is an artist, and you know that can lead to complications for the Crown. And I suggest finding someone more malleable and less artistic.